Have you ever come across someone who appears to always be in a crisis? I mean, something always seems to be going on. If you have, or maybe you're someone who is struggling with that yourself, then this video is for you, so stay tuned. So let's get right to it. How do you deal with someone who always seems to be in a crisis? Maybe you've encountered people like this where they are going through a normal day and all of a sudden there's a crisis out of nowhere. Maybe you've been in a relationship with someone who things seem to be going really well and all of a sudden there's a crisis. If you have, you understand what I'm talking about. And I want to help you understand what's going on with someone who might be struggling like that. So the first thing to understand is this. Let's think about it in terms of anxiety. Now, I've talked about this in other videos, but there's a concept that I teach a lot, and that is that our mind always wants to match our body. In other words, if my body is feeling a certain way physiologically, then my mind is going to create a story to match my body. So the example I use a lot is this. Let's imagine that you and I down 3 energy drinks really quickly. If we down 3 energy drinks really quickly, we're going to get a rapid heartbeat, and our body's going to begin to mimic anxiety. And then what will happen is our minds will race to make up a story to understand our bodies. And for me, since I'm a really busy person, I'm on the move a lot, if I drink too much caffeine, let's say, and my body mimics anxiety, my mind will immediately race to, oh no, was I supposed to be somewhere else today? Did I hit that deadline on this book or whatever I'm doing? And so my mind will race to create a story to match my body. But that's true of all of us. Our minds want to match our bodies. Now, I want you to keep that in mind as I talk about crises. So let's imagine that we are in a room, and let's say that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is like a super high crisis brain. So your brain is in beyond high crisis, and 1 is your brain is just vibing at a really calm state. So let's say that a fire breaks out, and we're in a building and a fire breaks out. It's very natural that our brain could shoot up, a very calm brain could shoot up to an 8 or a 9, or if it's bad enough, maybe even a 10. And then when you go outside the building and you're safe, your brain will come back down to a 1. Now, for people who are what I would call crisis-prone people, their brains vibe normally at about a 4 or a 5. And so if a crisis-prone person has a normal brain vibing at this level, then they're always going to feel like they're in crisis. And again, come back to the energy drinks, come back to understanding the concept with anxiety that our minds always want to match our bodies. So if a person is vibing at this level, they're going to create stories around them to try to make sense out of why they feel that way, why they feel in crisis. So let's take a relationship, for instance. You might be driving down the road and you're with your partner, and your partner maybe is struggling with this crisis-prone tendencies. And so maybe all of a sudden your partner says, well, what about 3 weeks ago? We never did finish that fight. Or what about this? And they start to seemingly create a crisis out of nowhere. Well, the reason why they're doing that is their brain is vibing right around here. And so to make sense out of it, they have to create a story, and their mind races to the first story that makes sense. Now, I know that there are labels, there are diagnoses for things, but I try to avoid all of that. On my channel, I'm just talking about human behavior, without labels, without any of that stuff. And let's talk about it on a continuum, because I really believe that all this stuff happens to all of us on a continuum. To some people it happens more, to some people it happens less. I have found that it's really beneficial not to judge others for what they're going through, but if you really want to learn how to deal with someone who's struggling with something like this, then it's really effective to first and foremost understand what's happening, and second, not take things personally. So people say to me all the time, well, how can I not take it personally? They're talking about me. They're specifically yelling at me. They're bringing up things from my past. Well, I'm not saying that it's easy to do, but I am saying that it absolutely can be done with practice. You can learn to not take things personally. And not only can you learn to do it, but it's actually a really effective way to deal with someone who's struggling with crisis-prone tendencies. So let me explain it this way. There is a difference when we speak between content, which are the words that we say, and process, how we say it. When we, for example, if I said something like, you know I love you. Now, I might be saying the words, content, I love you, but the way I said it was kind of mean and angry. So my content were the words, I love you, but my process was anger, intimidation. When you can learn to distinguish between content, the words people say, and process, how they say them, you will be at a tremendous advantage. Because if you can learn how to focus on process, on how people are saying them, then you don't have to get swept up in the content. Let's come back to driving down the road, you're in a car, your loved one is vibing at this 4 or 5, all of a sudden breaks out something out of nowhere, seemingly to start or pick a fight out of nowhere, and you now understand that this is what's happening inside that person's brain. So instead of getting caught up in the content, you focus on process and say you really see, it seems like you're really upset right now. It seems like you got a lot going on in your mind right now. It seems like your mind's moving really quickly right now. So in a genuine, loving, and compassionate and understanding way, you're saying something to the effect of, it seems like you have a lot going on in your mind right now. Now remember, the tone of voice that you express that with is huge. In other videos, I'll say something and then people will throw out comments and say, well, I'm just supposed to say this, and I never mean for you to just say anything. I don't think life is just say this and everything will be better. What I do aim to teach you is this, to be mindful of how you're coming across to others, to be mindful of your tone of voice, and to be mindful of your authenticity. Are you being genuine in the way you're interacting with other people? So if you're interacting with someone who's a crisis-prone person and you start telling them, oh, you're just a crisis-prone person, that doesn't do anything to help the situation. That just antagonizes the situation. Instead, if you're willing to lead with compassion, if you're willing to lead with understanding, then you can focus on process instead of focusing on content. And when you focus on process, you don't have to take things personally, even if they seem to be personal toward you. Again, I don't think this is easy. I don't think it's a just do this. I do think, however, that it is the appropriate steps to begin to take. Now remember, while we are looking at human behavior and we're looking at someone who's struggling with crisis-prone tendencies, there is a tendency for us to want to blame the entire ineffective interaction on them. But I think that's a big mistake, because we are all a part of every interaction we have. So just because someone is struggling with crisis-prone tendencies, just because someone's brain might be vibing at a higher level toward crises, does not mean that they are entirely to blame for everything. In fact, to have this awareness, to know that someone's going through it, I believe puts more responsibility on you to be more compassionate, to be more patient with that person. Imagine if somebody had a broken arm and the arm was in a cast. That person still might be able to do the dishes, but they're going to have a tougher time doing it. In the same way, when someone's struggling with something mentally, they're still able to do things, but it is a little bit more difficult. So I invite you to be more compassionate with others. When you're dealing with someone who appears to be a crisis-prone person, a person who seems to create crises out of midair, what I would invite you to do is step back, think, process. What is the emotion they're attempting to express versus let me react to the words that they're saying. Be mindful that a crisis-prone person has a brain that's vibing at this level, a 4 or a 5, on the regular, which means they're going to want to continually find ways to create stories to match what they're going through. If, on the other hand, you're not dealing with someone who's struggling with crisis-prone tendencies, and you, in fact, are the one who's watching right now who is probably would fall under this category of a crisis-prone person, then what I would invite you to do is start to be mindful of when your brain starts to elevate and start to be mindful of the absolute human nature for us to want to have our minds match our bodies. And instead of creating a story, sit with what's happening with you, be mindful of it, and almost watch it as if you're watching a boat float by on a river. And when we can step back and be the observer, we have a much better time moving through this experience. For whether or not you're communicating with someone who's crisis-prone, or whether or not you're struggling with crisis-prone tendencies yourself, whatever you're going through, as always, I wish you much peace. If you like this video, I would ask you to hit like, subscribe, and then I'm going to ask you to go a step further and even invite you to please share this video with a friend. What I really want to do is impact as many people as possible, and I believe this information can be helpful for people, so I would love for you to share it. Thank you so much.